Good morning, everybody, and welcome to class this morning. Thank you for joining, or thank you for watching if you're watching this later on. As we get started this morning, just a couple announcements. You've probably already noticed that this module, in terms of the assignments and the things that you have to do, is a little bit different. A lot of the stuff that we do in the next few modules, which will be modules 7, 8, and 9, these are application specific. So in module 7, which is what we're currently on now, we're looking at Outlook, Microsoft Outlook. In module 8, which will be the next module that we'll start next week, we'll be looking at Microsoft Word. And then I believe 2 weeks after that, we'll be looking at Microsoft Excel. So we're talking about Outlook, and you'll probably notice that the Outlook assignments are a little bit different. A couple things to note with those. One is that as you are completing the interactive assignments, you'll complete one and you'll move on to the next one, and then you'll move on to the next one, and so on and so forth. The grade that you get will increase as you complete the different pieces of the assignment. So if you can only complete 1 or 2 pieces and then you stop, you'll get a fraction of a grade. If you complete everything, then you'll get the full grade. And I have another video that I will be posting along with the recording this week from a colleague of mine who is a little bit ahead and made a couple videos that were specifically about the next few modules, this Outlook module, and then the Word and Excel modules, since they are a little bit different. But one of the things that we won't be doing in terms of our live streams and our class work here is talking about Outlook, or talking about Word, or talking about Excel. By and large, the material does a great job at walking you through these applications, how to do them, how to do certain things in them. And it would just be redundant, and most of you wouldn't watch it anyway if I just got on these live streams and just showed you how to do those sorts of things. So as a result, what I like to do for my lessons for these weeks is I like to talk about stuff that's kind of related to the application, but not actually work with the application. Just because it would be, that stuff is better served by the material in your text, by the online assignment material. So it's better for me to talk to you about different stuff. And so I'm going to talk to you today about the components of effective email and writing a good email. Because this is something that everybody's going to have to know, right? In modern times, basically, the way that you communicate for business, by and large, is through email. Even organizations that, once previously didn't do anything by email, now people have emails and they're sending email around. Because email is an asynchronous form of communication. I can send a message and then just wait on you to receive it and send me one back. I don't have to catch you while you're in your office or at your phone. Or maybe you've forgotten your phone and left it somewhere for like a cell phone, that sort of thing. I can send you an email, and then your email is relatively close at hand for most people. Like, I'm always within arm's length of my email, which is why if you've sent me an email before, you've probably gotten a relatively quick response to it in most cases, just because my email is pretty much with me all the time. And so I get the message and I respond. It's not exactly necessarily the healthiest or best thing to do, is to always respond to email incredibly quickly like that. We'll talk about kind of triaging emails and how we can know what's more important when sending and receiving emails. But we can have, our emails on our computers, in our pockets all the time with our cell phones. Email is ubiquitous, so we should get accustomed to writing good emails, because that's going to benefit us in the long run. So we're going to talk about components of effective email today. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is the subject line. The subject line, the thing at the top of the email. The line that appears when it shows up in your inbox. These are important. We want to treat these like newspaper headlines. This should kind of get your reader's attention a little bit. Tell them the main point of your email, or the idea that you want the reader to take away from your email. Right? So we want something that's kind of descriptive as our email subject line. Stuff like hi or question or FYI just on their own. Not very good email subject lines, because they don't give your user, or rather your reader. Been doing a lot of web development work here lately, and the people who interact with websites are users, but people who interact with email are readers. It doesn't give your reader an idea of how important your email is, or when they need to respond to it, or what it's all about. Which really brings us to one of our big points in terms of how we work with email and how we should write an email. Because really we'll talk about several etiquette things over the course of this little presentation this morning, and it all boils down to trying to be respectful of the other person, of the person that you're sending the message to, of their time. Right? Because you know what life's like for you. You're busy. We're all busy. And you know what email's like too. You probably get it. At the very least, you get it from the college here. And, you can put in perspective your college email. You know that some of the emails that you get are super important. Like, oh, Mr. Ramsey's telling us that this stuff's due on Sunday. Let's make sure we get it done. And some of it's not as important. Like, oh, they're going to have a special in the cafeteria on Thursday. A day when I'm not normally on campus anyway. So that doesn't really matter to me. So the first point through which we kind of triage our email and decide what's important and what's not important is via this subject line. So if the subject line is descriptive, if the subject line has good information in it that kind of summarizes everything in a little short sentence, you can immediately decide, oh yeah, this email, I need to read this email, and I need to make sure that I take care of this. Or you can say, well, this doesn't really involve me, this is not so important, I can kind of skip this. So when we think about email subject lines, we can think about the vague ones like hi, or question, or FYI. And we can think about something that's more descriptive, like maybe if I wanted to have a meeting with somebody. And maybe it's a time-sensitive thing. Maybe I need to make sure I meet with them before the end of the year for some reason or another. I can go ahead and title my message, give it the subject of my ask. and say, hey, meeting on Thursday, December 2nd or whatever. So then not only do they know that you're requesting a meeting, but they know that you're requesting a meeting within a certain time frame. So they probably realize that this is an important message and it needs to be opened up and read. Think about your own emails and your own subject lines. The things that catch your attention the most and draw you in and get you to read the message. In thinking about those, which ones do you think are the most effective? And why? Just answer that question for yourself right now, wherever you're at. Just kind of sit there and think about that. Or maybe pull up your college email and think about, which of these emails are the most effective in catching my attention and getting me to open and read them? And why do they do that? What about this catches my attention the most? What about this communicates its urgency the most? And then think about those techniques. Think about those best practices when you're writing your own emails and creating your own subject lines for your emails. Another big and important thing here are your greetings and your sign-offs. And these are going to be highly dependent on who that other person is that you're sending a message to. We want to use some kind of greeting and some kind of sign-off. It's just polite. Right? It's basic etiquette. You can think about emails the same way that you think about conversations in the real world. You don't necessarily go up to somebody and just start talking. You go up to somebody and say, hello. So you want to put some kind of greeting in your email. You don't just want to start with your text. And you don't just want to stop at the end without a signature. And the types of greetings and the types of signatures that you use are going to be highly dependent on who you're communicating with and how well you know them. And if you don't know the person very well, it might be kind of confusing as to how to address them or how to sign off. Like, oh, I've got my instructor here at the college. How do I address them? I'm, talking to my boss. How do I address my boss? And in these sorts of instances, it's always kind of better to err to the side of formality. We always want some kind of effort. And the more formal you are, the less likely you are to offend. Like, they might think you're a little weird if they think the relationship's just a little bit better than ultra formality. They might think you're a little weird, but at least they won't be mad at you. Or think that you were rude. So we have like our examples here, and they're of varying formalities. Dear Professor Smith, dear Mr. Ramsey, dear whomever. This is kind of addressing your, addressing your professor, your instructor, addressing your, boss. A real formal greeting. We have one that's in the middle here. Hello, Miss McMahon. So it's a little more in the middle. It's a little more familiar, but still relatively formal. because you're using a title for an individual, Miss, Mr., Doctor, whatever, whatever their appropriate title is. You want to make sure that you're using that if you want it to be a little more formal. Hello isn't quite as formal as dear, but it's still relatively formal. Still fairly professional. So, it's a little more familiar, not quite as formal as Dear Professor Smith, but a bit more than casual nonetheless. And then finally we have more of a casual greeting. Hi, Mary Jane. Hi, very informal. And then addressing a person by their first name. Especially in certain situations, that's a big no-no. Power dynamics and boundaries and what have you. Now, one of the places where this becomes a big problem, and you might encounter it when you're job hunting, is when you're emailing somebody, but you either A, don't know the name of the person in particular, or B, it's going to an entire group of people. Ideally, you want to try to find out if you're emailing a specific individual and address that email to that specific individual if at all possible. But there are some times when this isn't going to be possible and you just want to try to use something generic and polite. Something like, to whom it may concern, dear members of the selection committee, or, a little bit less formal, hello everyone. Which is the way that I address all of my announcements when I send out my announcements to you all that you might have noticed. Hello everyone. A little less formal, a little more friendly, but still polite. And your closing is also extremely important because it not only lets the reader know who is contacting them, which can sometimes be confusing. Like you might think, well, like my email address is there, so they know who's contacting them. But sometimes those email addresses can be kind of confusing. Some places will use a first initial, and then if the last name is too long, it'll truncate it or chop it off. So in those sorts of situations, it doesn't really say, unless they have a display name present, who the person is that is emailing. And even still, you can't really assume. So it's always best to sign off with a closing. At the very least, your name at the end of the email. And if it's someone who is really unfamiliar with you need to put some context with it. Like your title and the organization that you work for. That way, if you're emailing another business about an order, they don't just know, oh, this is Tom Smith. This is Tom Smith, the purchasing manager from Smith Co. or whatever. Right? There's some context there in regard to who is emailing. And here we have a good example of a really informative email. And it brings up another good point. Right? This email here is kind of a little sample email that was written. I'll pull this one up full screen so you can get a good view of it. It's a little email that was written, it's a totally fake email. But it shows us a lot of good examples of how to write an email. It's got a good descriptive subject line. It has a opening that is generic because they don't know exactly who they're emailing. It has a closing, and it has detailed information in the body of the email. And all of this, again, kind of gets back to those points of what I want to do here is respect the time of the person I am emailing, so we can try to get this situation solved as quickly as possible. And we do that here in several different ways. So in our subject line, we can see in the to field, it's just the email address is at info@newexample.com. So we can see there that it's a generic email address. So it probably goes to a bunch of people or goes to a queue, and then the first person in the queue just responds to it. So we don't really know who we're going to be emailing. So right off the bat, we know that when we address our email, we need to address it to an unknown entity. Then we have this subject line, billing refund, account ID G1V3B@CK. So right there, in those we'll call them 5 words, even though one of them's an account number, I'm told an entire story about what this message is about. I know what this person wants. They're looking for a billing refund. I know who they are because they've given me their account ID. And so based on that, I can triage this message and I can say, oh, this is pretty important. I probably need to address this pretty quickly. And then it starts out with to whom it may concern. Again, we don't know who we're sending this to, but we want to be polite, so we'll just throw in a generic greeting here, to whom it may concern. I am writing to request that Make Believe website company refund the $200 fee that was wrongfully applied to my account ID G1V3B@CK. Upon notification there was a billing issue with my account, I called to request this refund at 2:30 p.m. on May 1st, 2011. The representative told me that he would refund the total amount within 3 to 5 business days. I called back at 8:20 a.m. on May 10th, 2011 to confirm that the refund was processed. The representative, John D. Doe, told me that I must submit the refund request via email. After placing me on hold for nearly 30 minutes, he informed me that once I submitted this letter, the $200 would be refunded within 48 hours. This experience has been extremely frustrating as a new customer and unprofessional on the part of Make Believe website company. I would greatly appreciate it if Make Believe website company would honor the agreement reached in the phone conversation today, refunding the full $200 within the next 48 hours. Please feel free to contact me at 555-515-5555 if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you in advance for your time and cooperation. Sincerely, J.A. Cupid, Ph.D. So we've got all that information there in the body of the email. Everything really that they could think of that someone might need to know in order to get their refund processed. And processed in a timely manner, because it seems like they're a little bit unhappy about the situation at hand here. And then we've signed it at the end with a formal closing. So we've talked about closings and what constitutes a formal closing and what constitutes an informal closing, but we haven't really looked at them. These are some examples of some informal closings, things like thank you, best wishes, see you tomorrow, and regards. More formal might be stuff like sincerely or respectfully yours. Now, believe it or not, there's actually been some time put into studying these in terms of what is and isn't more formal. And so we have this chart here of email closing lines and how familiar or unfamiliar an email closing line is. and how natural versus how self-conscious an email closing line is. And you can see some of the things that are high, that rank highly toward both natural and familiar. These are our informal closing lines. These are for people that you know really well or that you have a close interpersonal relationship with. Like, you wouldn't sign an email to your boss with love. But if you were writing an email to, I don't know, your cousin, they might think you're weird if you sign it with warmest regards. Later might be a more appropriate closing for your cousin. And we see the one, my favorite one, is right there in the middle. That's the one that I use all the time. Just completely neutral. Thanks. Because I don't know that anybody can really get mad at thanks. Or a little bit more on the formal side is thank you. So if you're really in doubt, a good email closing that's relatively formal while not being overly formal, but could still get away with being not kind of stuck up hoity-toity, like something like with warmest regards. It's just a good thank you. Now you might hear some people being like, "Oh, the thanks in advance. That's that's something that you shouldn't do. That's a no-no." Because psychologically, like, a thanks in advance is essentially just trying to trick somebody into going ahead and doing something for you, not giving them the opportunity to say no. And there is a difference between thanks in advance and just a simple thank you. Because, it's all about context, right? Like, a thank you could just be like, well, thank you for reading. Not necessarily thank you for doing this thing that I've asked you to do. So we do kind of want to be careful with our closing lines. But there are always ways that we can answer these things in order to make sure we're on the right track and communicating to people in the right way. And I'll talk about CC and BCC really quickly. Those are the final slides that I have here, are about CC and BCC. The rule of the to field, the CC field, and the BCC field. So a good rule of thumb is that if the person needs to reply, or if the message is directed to the person, you put their email in the to field. If you just want to keep the person in the loop and let them know some information, and they don't need to reply, or the information isn't directly directed toward them, you put their email address in the carbon copy field, or CC field. And copying individuals on an email is a good way to send your message to the main recipient while also sending someone else an exact copy of that image. Now, when you use that CC field, one of the big things to keep in mind about that CC field is that everybody who is on the email chain can see everyone else's emails on the resulting email. So you can see all the emails in the to field. You can see all the emails in the CC field. So if you want to keep certain email addresses confidential, then what you might want to do is put those email addresses in the blind carbon copy, or BCC field. So if you don't want everybody on the email to know everyone else's email address, you can put all of their emails, if you'd like, into the BCC field. And then the only recipient address that will be visible to the recipients is the one in the to field. Now, one of the important things to remember there, though, is that you don't want to assume that blind copying will always keep recipients from knowing who else was copied. Because if that recipient goofs, hits reply all on the email, it's going to reply to everybody in the to field, the CC field, and so then what they've essentially done is exposed themselves to some people that you might not have wanted to know this other person was on the email chain. You know, maybe there's somebody at work, they're not doing a great job and you ask them for something, or maybe they're unreliable. You ask them for something, so you try to keep their boss in the loop. So you put their email address in the BCC field because you don't want them to know that you're secretly telling their boss that you also asked them to do this. So you want to kind of keep that in mind. The final slide here that we have is actually an example. To Brad, so the message is going to Brad. The message is intended for Brad. And we've CC'd Maggie. So we can assume that Brad and maybe Maggie are bosses of some sort in a work environment. And Kevin here is sending them a message, and he's saying, don't tell John I said so, but I think he deserves a huge raise. Well, I've got a feeling that John's going to find out because John is listed in the BCC field, in the blind carbon copy field. Now, neither Brad nor Maggie will know by default that John was included on this email. You know, maybe John and Kevin are in cahoots. And they're trying to say, you know, and Kevin's trying to convince Brad and Maggie to give John a raise. And he wants to let John know, hey, I sent this email. Be on the lookout. Our plan is in motion. So he puts John's name in the BCC field. And neither Brad nor Maggie would ever know that John is in on it. Unless John were to hit reply all, then he would expose that he was on the email to both Brad and Maggie. Like if he were to accidentally hit reply all and say, "Way to go, Kevin. I think this might work." Uh-oh. Big uh-oh. John made a mistake. So that's what we need to consider when we're using our to field, our CC field, and our BCC field. And at the end of the day, that's what we need to keep in mind when we're writing effective emails. So to break that down, use a greeting and a closing. Be respectful of your reader's time by having an informative subject line and including all of the information that you think they would need to answer your question or to help you out in the body of the email. Put the email address of the person that you're directly sending the message to in the CC field, or in the to field. Put anybody else that you want to copy on that message in the CC field. And if you don't want people to know that they're copied on that message, you put them in the BCC field. And that'll help you write good emails. So that's all that I got for you for today. Again, thank you for joining me, or thank you for watching this later if you're watching the recording. If you have any questions, please send me an email. Let me know. Once again, we'll be putting this out along with another video from a colleague of mine after we're done here with the recording. Assignments for this module are due by Sunday at 11:59 p.m. So please get those done by that time. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. Send me an email. whatever you'd like to do there. I'm going to hang out in the chat for a couple more minutes just to see if anybody who is live with me has a question. But again, that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for joining me, and we'll catch you next time.
When everything is upside